For any parent, the worst fear and the worst thing that could ever happen is to have a child go missing or worse, be unalived. And in this particular case, we're going to cover none other than the horrific murders perpetrated by the Oakland County child killer. This is going to be a hard one to cover. I'm going to try to go swiftly through all of the information so it doesn't prolong too long of an episode. And I also don't want to go into too much detail about the actual murders, as this was done to children. And I really don't want to cover and go into morbid, gruesome detail for the respect of those children and the respect to the parents of those children and family members. So without further ado, let's get into this episode.
An intensive hunt is on in suburban Detroit for a schoolboy missing since last week, the latest in a series of child kidnappings there.
11-year-old Timothy King left his Birmingham home last Wednesday evening and bought candy at this pharmacy. He never returned home. He is the fourth child in 13 months to disappear from Detroit suburbs under similar circumstances. The pattern is the same. A child 10 to 12 years is abducted and kept prisoner, in some cases as long as 16 days. The child is then killed and the body dumped in a street. Police have investigated more than 1,500 leads. So far, no murderer and no motive. The kidnappings have taken place within a 5-mile radius in affluent suburbs north of Detroit.
From February 15, 1976 to March 16th of 1977, 4 children between the ages of 10 to 12 years old by the names of Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine McKellick, and Timothy King went missing near their homes in Oakland County, Michigan, just north of Detroit. What happened to them is that they were strangled, smothered, or shot, and their bodies were left in public areas on snowy days. So this is something that they had a commonality between them during their murders. Now, Stebbins and King had been essayed. Now, evidence showed that each child had been fed and washed in captivity prior to being unalived and earning that the so-called moniker of the Oakland County child killer. And this was just a macabre alternate moniker that they also gave this person. It was also dubbed the babysitter killer. So, it was either the Oakland County child killer or the babysitter killer. Either one of those will land you in the same story of this same sadistic, horrible monster that was unaliving tiny children. Now, the investigation into the Oakland County child killer was the largest in the history of the county. It was even larger than the highly publicized 1975 disappearance of labor leader Jimmy Hoffa.
They say Bob Kennedy is going to be the next Attorney General. Do you have anything to say about that, Mr. Hoffa?
I have no comment except to say that the country has many competent, qualified lawyers who have tried lawsuits.
So that's how much they took into consideration what was going on with the children, what was being done, and the investigation that needed to be perpetrated to find the monster that was having these atrocious crimes being done. But nonetheless, we're going to get to the bottom of a little bit further. It's not going to have such a happy ending. It's not going to have, a good closing, but we'll get there. Now, despite the size of the investigation, the killer was actually never found. So heartbreaking. There are, however, several suspects, and the investigation did result in the breakup of a large organized pedo ring run from an island on nearby Lake Michigan. So if there's any positive takeaways from this particular case is the fact that a large, hugely big pedo or very organized pedo ring was actually taken down, which was being run nearby Lake Michigan. So that right there is a positive takeaway from this horrific crimes that were committed. If anything could be taken away from it, that could be helpful. Now, after the murder of Timothy King, the last known victim of the Oakland County child killer, Timothy King, a woman told authorities that she had actually seen Timothy speaking to a man in the parking lot of the pharmacy where he was actually last seen on the day that he disappeared. So this one witness that came up, this woman did say, hey, the last time that this little kid was seen alive, I was the witness to it. He was actually talking to a man in a nearby pharmacy, if that's of any type of help. A forensic sketch artist was actually called to the scene so this woman could give the details and he could draw that, that sketch of this person. And they were able to make a sketch from the woman's description. Her description said this was a man around 25 to 35 years old. He was a little husky. He was a white man with dark, shaggy hair and something called mutton chops. So if I find what it is, I'll insert it on the screen here, description of what mutton chops is, or maybe even a picture of that. But according to the witness, the suspect was seen driving a blue AMC Gremlin, prompting authorities to question every Gremlin owner in Oakland County, but to no avail. They never found anybody that fit the description, owned a Gremlin or anything anywhere near what this woman had said. Now, in 2013, a blue Gremlin was actually found buried under a construction site in nearby Grand Blanc Township, Michigan. And investigators on the case's task force responded to the scene immediately to try to collect the car's VIN number and any type of DNA evidence that they could possibly find. Though they held out little hope that this would uncover anything, like we said, 2013 to so many years back, it would have been, a long shot, but a shot nonetheless, if possible. They had long believed that that blue gremlin was actually just a red herring. So at the time that this woman came out and said, hey, I saw, King Timothy talking to this man outside of a pharmacy. He looked like this and this, and he was actually driving this particular car, right? The whole time, investigators thought that maybe it was a red herring left by this particular witness or just a red herring to just kind of throw him off of the actual investigation, because we're talking about the possibility of a large organized pedo ring being involved. And we all know these organized rings have a lot of moving parts and a lot of people that function in them to try to not get these people caught, right? And so the thought process was they threw this at us. It was not going to be helpful. It had nothing to do with anything. And all they wanted us to do was to focus our energies trying to really pursue this particular clue when it was going to lead us absolutely nowhere and give them time to actually cover up or get away with the crime either way, right? But here we go. In 1977, police received a tip that pedo Christopher Bush had killed Mark Stebbins. So they received this as a tip. The first victim of the Oakland County child killer. Remember, Stebbins was the first victim. Now, Bush, whose family was wealthy and very well connected, received probation for unrelated child SA charges. So in either case, he had been previously gotten charges and convicted of child SA. Either way. Now, after passing a polygraph, he was never charged with the abduction, SA, and murder of Stebbins. So they used a polygraph test as a means to take away any type of incrimination on this guy. They said with just a polygraph test, if it comes out positive, great. If it comes out negative results, then you're fine. You didn't do the crime, right? Even though this guy, they got a tip, this guy was well connected. There was connection things that didn't make sense in there about this guy and the first victim, which was Mark Stebbins. Still, they went ahead and they just used a polygraph test to be able to say he's good, he's fine, he can go. Now, speculation that Bush was the child killer persisted, especially after he died by unaliving himself in 1978 under suspicious circumstances. He was found neatly tucked into his bed with a gunshot wound between his eyes, but there was no gun residue or blood splatter on him. So basically, this was not him unaliving himself. This was actually a murder, a staged murder to look like he had unalived himself. And if that is not suspicious enough in the grand scheme of already knowing that he was pretty much involved or could have been involved in some fashion or form into these child, murders. On top of that, this very organized pedo ring was in the area, and it had well-connected places and high, places in it and stuff like that. Why would they want to silence this guy is the question, because they silenced him. Somebody unalived him and made it seem like he unalived himself. And the only way that you would want to do that is if you would want something to not come out, right? Now, 4 shell cases were found in his room. Also found in his home were blood-stained ropes and a drawing of a boy screaming in pain, which resembled stabbings. So the bottom line is he either unalived himself, which we all know that chances of that are not that great, seeing as how the crime scene was looked at. Number 2 was they could have unalived him to silence him from any information that he could have had and just staged it to look like he did it himself, feeling guilty over the Stebbins case, and therefore have him look guilty so that they could close that case. Or number 3, it was someone close to Stebbins, the victim, that decided to take revenge into their own hands and unalive this guy who they felt deep in their heart was probably the guilty party to essaying and murdering Mark Stebbins. So here's another notable piece of information. Bush also drove a blue Vega that resembled the gremlin that was allegedly seen at the scene of Timothy King's abduction. So the woman that said, hey, he was driving a blue gremlin could have mistaken the car and could have identified as a gremlin when in actuality it was a Vega, which was driven by Bush. So everything was kind of patching along or puzzling together to look like Bush had actually been responsible for at least the unaliving and the essay of Timothy King, and or at least his abduction, leading on to his unaliving and essay. Despite all of this, though, it was confirmed in 2012 that the DNA extracted from the crime scenes did not match Bush, and he was definitely not the Oakland child killer. So in the future, in 2012, there was DNA extracted from the crime scenes, and they were able to determine that it did not match Bush. And so at that point in time, he was exonerated, most definitely, from being the Oakland child killer. Now, in nearly 50 years, there have been so many suspects and false leads in this whole Oakland County child killer case. There was hair analysis evidence that pointed to an essay victim of Christopher Bush, and similar evidence that suggested essay offender Archibald Edward Sloan may have also been the culprits. Now, Theodore Lamborghini and Richard Lawson, who ran a child essay ring in Detroit in the 1970s, were also suspects at this time. Like I said, the amount of suspects is huge, and how we're breaking them down and exonerating suspect after suspect, it's a long list, which I cannot detail every single one, but these are the important ones that popped up, or the ones that had a little bit more substance to why they were suspects. But in 2006, Lamborghini claimed that he knew the name of the killer, but that allegedly, after he divulged it, led nowhere. So we don't have that name that he divulged because it was never publicized and it was never given out in the police information. But we know that according to the police and according to the investigators, it led nowhere. So no point in mentioning. Investigators also received letters from someone using the alias, confessing to his involvement in the crimes with his roommate that he named in that letter Frank, who he claimed was the actual killer. And in 2012, investigators announced that they were close to obtaining a DNA match on an actual suspect. Despite all the possible leads and how many people were called out for this and investigated and checked, as of 2022, the identity of the killer or possible killers has remained unknown. But the Oakland County Police Department maintains currently a task force dedicated to the investigation, and the case still remains open. A mini-series about the murders was released in 2019 titled The Children of the Snow, if you're interested in looking for this. If I'm able to find if it's streaming anywhere, I will go ahead and also insert that at this point here so that you could take a look at that and a little bit more information broken down in that mini-series. Though the killer remains at large, the investigation was not entirely in vain. Among the 18,000 tips that were received and that flooded that tip line, there were several that actually led to a 1976 crackdown on a pedophile ring, on a pedo ring run from North Fox Island all the way onto Lake Michigan. At the head of the ring was the island's owner. Again, why does this not surprise us at this point? Millionaire Francis Sheldon. Sheldon lured boys to the island through his brother Paul's children's mission. Be very, very, very wary of camps, missions, religious things of that nature, extra sports programs, all of these things disguised to entice children, entice parents to send their children out to these places. Now, this Paul's children's mission, which supposedly ran a nature camp, once again, for underprivileged boys on North Fox. Like, just how dare they? Just honestly, at this point, it's like, how freaking dare you? But Sheldon also took some of the boys skiing in Aspen or to parties at his home in the Caribbean and even set up college funds for them. Hush money, I would call college funds for them. He was seen as a benefactor of children who lived in poverty. So like I said, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and just be very, very wary of these programs. If they sound too good to be true, they're possibly too good to be true. And just remember that, this was, of course, a ruse. Sheldon used the operation to essay the boys and invited his wealthy and powerful friends to the island to also do the same to these children. When investigators finally cracked down on the ring, many politicians and high-powered businessmen were arrested on child SA charges. And this is why these things managed to go on for a long time, because of who is involved in these crimes and what names are involved in these cover-ups. So Sheldon fled to the Netherlands. He is said to have died there in 1996. He was never caught. He never went and he never paid for these crimes or for hurting all of these children. He basically just fled to the Netherlands and never to be seen again. And he died there in 1996. Now, I have a direct quote from a neighbor of Timothy King, which was, as we know now, the fourth victim of the Oakland County child killer at the time of the abduction. So this quote was said at the time of the abductions in the 70s. And the following is said: when it happens to other people, you feel sympathy. But when it strikes your neighborhood, you're scared. And nothing truer than this. When we see some of these things happen and we see it on the news and we see this so-and-so child was taken and so-and-so thing happened and they cracked down on this and they found out and unalive this and unalive that and, these mass murders and things like that, we feel empathy. And the more it happens and the more constantly it happens, in the moment we're like, oh God, that's awful, and we just shuffle it. Why? Because we're becoming so desensitized to these things. But the truth is that if it happened in your neighborhood, if it happened to you, or if it happened to someone close to you, the impact of it would be enormous. And the impact of these things should weigh on all of us enormously, to make sure that we take precautions, to investigate everything. If you have a weird feeling, chances are there's something weird going on. And most of all, always, always try to keep yourself, children, and elders safe. So with that being said, thank you for listening to this episode. If there's any more information I can find on this case, I will most definitely go ahead and make another short video. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to this little tiny channel so they may grow. Please give us a like, and also activate your notifications so that you get notified when we do place a little new video on here. And share with everyone. Share even on the grounds that they can hear this, and maybe they can be conscious about their children or aware of that. Share just in case somebody knows something about something and it could help out, or share simply because this is to help out so that more children are protected, or more people are aware of some of these atrocious things that have happened, and just makes them feel like they need to have an extra layer of safety around them. So with that being said, thank you so much and have a wonderful day.